Welcome to OJAICAST. I'm your host, Christopher Noxon, and I've had a blast speaking with some of the composers, artists, and this year's music director, Claire Chase, in previous episodes. This will be our last episode in the run-up to the festival, as we've been digging into the exciting program coming to Ojai June 5th through the 8th. Today we're speaking with violist and composer Leilehua Lanzilotti and composer Liza Lim. Both are artists whose work deeply explores this year's theme of the music of the natural world. So let's get to it. Leilehua Lanzilotti is a Hawaiian composer and violist. She's known for innovative multimedia installations and non-traditional concert experiences. She describes her work as creating new paths forward in language sovereignty, water sovereignty, land stewardship, and respect. Aloha, Leilehua.
Aloha.
Thanks for joining us. Are you in Hawaii at the moment?
I am in Hawaii. I live here in the back of a valley, so there might be some birds in the background as we speak that you'll hear hanging out in the tree outside.
Excellent. On the Big Island?
I live on Oahu, which is the main island where the Honolulu is, the main city.
So I guess this is your first time that your work has been performed at the Ojai Music Festival, and also the first time you'll be playing here. We're excited so much for your debut. What led you this way?
I'm really excited to be there. I am grateful that Claire has programmed so much of my music in the festival and included me in various capacities, also performing in a bunch of different ways, which is really fun. And I've been to Ojai before. I have a dear friend who lives in the area, who's Osage, so I've been there and seen the spaces, and so it's been really fun, kind of imagining place and imagining the spaces themselves as I've been preparing to play there.
Excellent. Well, so this is Claire Chase, the musical director this year. You had a relationship with her before.
Yes, so she is a graduate of Oberlin, and I also went to Oberlin, although we weren't in the same class. And so a lot of the people in her group that she formed, the International Contemporary Ensemble, a bunch of my friends and former colleagues were in the original group that she formed. And so although I haven't had a chance yet to work with Claire personally, I've always come to support their concerts when I was in the area and have a lot of dear friends in the group. And so it's been fun. I think that she and I have a lot of overlaps in some of the composers that we really love working with and teach the music of and engage with in these different ways, like Anna Thorvaldsdottir. And so it's been really lovely whenever I see her kind of engaging about music and the way we're thinking about music. And so this feels like a really wonderful chance to be a part of her bigger vision for the festival with all of these other composers that I really, really respect.
Great. Yeah. A lot of kindred spirits and like-minded souls
Yeah.
here. Among the pieces that you're going to be doing at the Friday night concert on June 6th is Ko'u Inoa. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yes, Ko'u Inoa.
Let's take a listen to some of that. So that piece, it sounds like it's starting with arpeggios, primarily on the open strings, and it sounds like it's played on a viola, slowly starting to introduce other notes. Is that what we're hearing?
Yes, and I think the big thing to listen for is the overtones. Of course, overtones are what make string instruments sound so special, give them their quality of sound. And usually we don't hear them as pronounced because the way they're played in Brahms or other things is just as a bigger resonance of the sound, but it's the quality that makes you, even if you're not a musician, hear a violin, for example, versus a clarinet and say, oh, that's a violin or that's a string instrument because of the beautiful overtones. And so big thing about this piece and why I'm excited that it's opening the concert and the Holy Liftoff on Friday night is because it really is about inviting people in to listen and inviting them to listen in a certain way of the overtones. And so there's no electronic manipulation. But as someone who has an awful lot of synthesizers in my living room, it can sound like you're, turning the dial to sweep through different overtones. But it's all done acoustically with the bow placement. And so in doing that and keeping the grounding material, like you were saying, that open string, and then slowly evolving that with the melody, it's inviting people into listening to the evolution of pitch differently and to the overtones and the quality of sound and the timbre. And I think that timbre is something that a lot of the composers on the festival this year have in common in terms of the way that we use timbre and the way that we approach timbral evolution in our works.
I can't wait to get drowned in timbre. Lots of timbre. Now that recording we just heard wasn't you. That was who?
That was Jordan Bak, and he's a brilliant, brilliant violist. That's on the label Bright Shiny Things, and the album is called Impulse. And he's just such a beautiful player.
Yeah, we're gonna get to see you performing it.
Yes,
there's a video of you performing it online. I was looking at it, and there's, you're moving in such interesting ways, and the bow is going up and down the strings and creating all these harmonics. And it also looks like you're playing while kneeling on maybe like a prayer mat. Tell me about that. Tell me about that and how you position yourself.
Sure. So that first performance, that was the premiere of the piece. And I had been thinking about this piece for a really long time. I had been playing around with this concept of how it evolved for several years. I want to even say, 8 years, 7 or 8 years. I had kind of been playing it on my own for myself, but I hadn't ever played it publicly as a piece. And I had a chance to go to the Tank Center for Sonic Arts in Colorado. I was teaching out in Colorado, and I had a really cool boss, and that article had come out in the New Yorker about the Tank. And I said, can I take all of the contemporary music ensemble students out to the Tank so we can record their pieces in the Tank? We can rent a van, we can go. And my boss said, yeah, of course you should do that. So, which is amazing. And so the space has this incredibly long reverb in the way that it's an abandoned water tank. And when you play pitches, they linger in the air for a minute. It's really, really long decay. And so creating material that's going to work in that space is interesting, or thinking about that. And so I had been playing around with that, and it's really just people sit against the wall along the edge of the water tank, and then you are in the middle.
Oh, so magic.
Yeah, it's really magical. And so that live recording, there's no electronic manipulation. It sounds like there's something in there, but it's really just, that's the natural sound of the tank.
Yeah, you're also singing a little bit there, notes to complement and sort of harmonize. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, that's kind of towards the end of the piece. I start humming and singing, and different people perform it different ways. Sometimes people just hum everything. But I have fun with that in the sense of getting people to hear the different overtones and hear the different pitches evolving through the piece, that often when I start humming, or when someone's playing it and they start humming, the audience can't tell at first because they've been hearing all these different pitches coming from different places, and then this other kind of sound sneaks
emerges
into it.
Yeah, let's have a listen. Let's hear some more of that piece. You're going to be performing that twice at the festival, doing it solo on Friday evening and the other as an ensemble on Sunday. How does that work? How does that translate from solo to ensemble?
The ensemble version has a little bit more structure so that people can play together, but highlights some of those things that I really loved and kind of pulling out certain overtones at certain moments. And so it'll be fun to work on that with the group at Ojai and a bunch of folks that I've worked with a lot. So I think we'll be able to experiment.
And is it all strings?
It's all strings.
It's all strings. Great.
Yeah. I have a version for orchestra too, but at Ojai we're just playing the string version.
Well, producer Will and I have been obsessed with this particular composition. I cannot wait. It's so beautiful.
Thank you so
much. It really is hypnotizing and incredible. Another piece that you're doing on the schedule is on Saturday morning, June 8th at 10:30. It's called Ahupua'a. Let's hear a bit of that. So that is the Argus Quartet doing Ahupua'a. That is another really beautiful piece. Can you tell us about it?
So this came out of a collaboration with Argus Quartet on a much larger project that involved doing a bunch of school concerts and education concerts about home and what is home and what are the sounds of home. And specifically within that, creating this piece based on the idea of an ahupua'a, which is the traditional Hawaiian system for organizing land. And so when you think of, or I guess when I think of traditionally in other places, there'll be a fishing community or a farming community, and that's the specialization of that group. And then they trade with other communities. Well, in Hawaii, we have such a dramatic landscape, and everything is, we have one of the most, if not the most diverse rainfall climate in the world because of all these different landscapes within the islands. And so an ahupua'a was taking advantage of that and saying, well, instead of that, what if we kind of had a slice of land from the mountains to the ocean so that our community was actually doing all the different things that we need. And then within the community, we'd have all these different resources. And so I thought it would be interesting to kind of combine that conceptual idea about land division based on community needs with the water cycle for this program that we were doing with a bunch of students in California specifically. And so in the California schools, they learn about the water cycle in first to second grade. And so we wanted to highlight that and to have that be a part of this. And so the piece itself is kind of going through the water cycle from the clouds in the first movement and that sense, and then maybe drops of rain, maybe stars, depending on how you hear it. Through the middle movement, that's the active sounds of the middle of the valley where you have, taro fields and poi pounding, and there's that great poi pounding rhythm happening in the cello. And then the last movement is this melody from Li'okalani Kealoha Haku, as though it's kind of dispersed in the ocean. Mm-hmm. And the four players in the quartet are kind of playing, and slowly things kind of overlap in different ways until they overlap and they're all kind of coming together in more unified chords.
So blending and combining like the water table, sort of?
Yes. Yeah. And kind of as everything goes back to the ocean. So I thought that would be a fun thing to do with the students. It was really fun. We got all of these 600 kids at a time doing the water cycle hula together, and they had practiced it, which is so sweet.
Amazing.
With this, very non-apologetic experimental music,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Which was really fun. And then kind of getting them to think about, well, what are the sounds of your home? What are those things that overlap? What are the sounds of water in the place where you live?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that piece and so much of your work has such deep roots in where you come from, and that Hawaiian influence is so embedded in the work that you do. I'm wondering how else you have sort of woven those threads into your music.
Yeah, I think there's some different things that I think about often in terms of studying classical music traditionally, combined with, going to Halo Maiki, which was this kind of the hula school that I was at, and the way that we learn songs and the way that we learn things there. And when you're dancing, there's all of these percussive elements in Hawaiian music that are a part of the texture, and you don't necessarily learn them as musically as the music that's happening. But for example, you'll have these things that kind of sound like maracas, uli uli. That sound will be happening the whole time that the song is going, and it's not as though if you were to play that song with a band, you wouldn't have that percussion sound happening the whole time. But when you're dancing, there are these different timbres and these different layers of sound that are happening with the music that I've always found really interesting. And so I think that aspect of kind of the way that I build in these kind of bands of timbre into my music, I think is partially from that. So that I think my use of timbre sometimes I think is grounded in that experience.
Yeah, and those Hawaiian elements sort of interweaving into more traditional structures is really, really fascinating. I know you're performing a piece by Anna Thorvaldsdottir on Sunday morning. It's a piece called Sola. Let's listen to a clip of that. Wow, that is really beautiful. So that's a collaboration, I understand, with Anna. What is that process like of working with her?
I just really love Anna's music. She's so brilliant, and she's a string player herself. Although she doesn't perform, but she played the cello. And so a lot of the way that she writes and the way she approaches sound feels good in your hands. And I had approached her about writing a piece for viola and electronics. And I kind of given her some options of what she wanted to do, but she felt that electronics would be really fun to do. And so she sent me a bunch of material. And to be clear, she wrote all of the music and she designed the electronics. But in terms of creating the electronics, I went into the recording studio and did several hours of recording all of these different specific sounds. Some of the harmonics that you hear overlapped, different gestures, and all things that ended up in the piece but isolated. And then Anna took this material that I had recorded and wove it together into these really incredible immersive sound tracks. And so when I perform the piece live, I'm performing some of those same elements live, and then you hear them in the electronics in conversation, and it's really beautiful. It kind of can sound almost like echoes sometimes, or foreshadowing. The electronics will do something and then I'll do it. And so it's this kind of interesting dance between the two.
It's not a machine, even though it's coming from electronics.
Yeah.
So lastly, we're asking our guests to share some music that's been an inspiration to you or that you just love right now. And I understand that you might have two for us today. What's the first one?
Well, I thought it might be fun for some of the Ojai audiences that might not be as familiar with Hawaiian music to hear some of those influences. I obviously have some other musical influences like revel and people that I've loved playing in the world of being a violist, and obviously Anna's music and Marcos's music and Susie's music, just all these great people at the festival. And so I thought sharing some short pieces in Hawaiian music that influence the sound world of the pieces that folks will be hearing at Ojai might be fun.
Yeah.
And so the first one is related to Ko'uinoa, and it's Hawai'i Aloha. And this is the anthem that people will sing together at the end of big events, as kind of sporting events or, like hula performances, even the people who weren't performing. The whole audience will stand up and hold hands and sing this together. And we'll listen to it. As you're listening to it, you might hear the very slow evolving melody in Ko'uinoa is actually from Hawai'i Aloha.
Ooh, amazing. Let's hear some of this community song. That is Hawai'i Aloha.
That's Israel Kamakaviva Ole, or Brother Is, who you might recognize his voice from his version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Yeah.
Went viral. But this is his live version of Hawai'i Aloha, and you can kind of hear in the recording people singing live along with him, which is really, it's just he's such a beautiful artist.
I understand you have something else for us. Tell us about this second piece.
The other piece that I wanted to share is Ke Aloha o ka Haku. And this is often translated as the Queen's Prayer. And it's a song that the last queen of Hawaii, Liliuokalani, wrote while she was imprisoned in Iolani Palace. But she was a composer as well as the queen. So before she was the queen, she was the choir master and organist for Kawaiahao Church, which is one of the most important churches on the island. And she and all of her siblings were composers, actually. And so we have this beautiful window into the way that they were all connecting with modernity, using Hawaiian poetry and Hawaiian language and connecting that with the modern music they were encountering at the time, these church hymns. And so this piece, Ke Aloha o ka Haku, is some of the material you hear in the last movement of ahupua'a. But also I wanted to share it as a sense of, I think about that a lot in terms of our ali'i, our leaders at the time. We're also thinking about what are ways that we can use music and culture to blend these ideas of holding up our culture as equal to these contemporary things and to be engaged and interested in modernity at the same time as uplifting and continuing culture. And that's a big part of having fun engaging with these historical works, is thinking about this as this long line of continuing that energy in the way that I'm using contemporary experimental music and engaging with this traditional material.
Great. Let's listen to this blend of heritage and experimentation.
Oh
So that is the children's choir of where? Which children's choir is that?
Kamehameha Schools.
Okay, great. And while we're not going to hear any children's choir at the Ojai Music Festival, we are going to get you. Very excited for you to be here and to share your heritage and yourself and your resonances and your timbres with us. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Really looking forward.
Liza Lim is a composer, educator, and researcher based in Australia whose music focuses on collaborative and transcultural practices. Beauty, rage, noise, ecological connection, and female spiritual lineages are all at the heart of her recent works. She's collaborated with this year's music director, Claire Chase, on a piece being performed at this year's festival called Sex Magic. Hello, Liza. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Great to be here.
You know, the theme, we've spoken to Claire and Ara about how this all came together, and it sort of centers around nature. And I feel like your piece, How Forests Think, is one of the anchors of that theme and the whole festival, really, for obvious reasons. Let's have a listen to How Forests Think for the trees. So that was an excerpt from the piece How Forests Think by Liza Lim. Liza, tell us about how that piece sort of was born and grew.
Yes, so How Forests Think is a piece from 2016. It really came out of my encounter with an amazing book by anthropologist, ecologist Eduardo Con, who wrote this kind of really groundbreaking book which talked about how forests think. And it's part of a growing movement all over the world to ask these questions. How do forests think? Are rivers alive? And this sense of that humans are not just the only ones that are alive and conscious and evolving thought, but in fact the entire sort of ecosystemic world. And yeah, as soon as you spend time in different environments, by a river, in a rainforest, for instance, where there is this incredible diversity and density and, profusion of life, you see that there is an intelligence. You experience it in your body. And so this excerpt that you just played, The Trees, is where the musicians are given kind of frameworks to shift their sense of who they are through listening into a whole kind of interactive and ecological space where, who they are is also the sound, that the music is as alive as any of the persons. And that really kind of conditions the space in which we can experience this living quality that is kind of such a big part of what I'm interested in as a composer.
When you say that the musicians are given a framework, are they given what does the score look like?
Yeah, so the score shifts from being sort of very precisely notated using traditional music notation into a set of instructions. It asks people to attune themselves. I mean, it's very much related to these lineages of deep listening. Of course, Pauline Oliveros, who's right, such an icon, and also at the center of the Ojai Festival this year. Yep. And these are practices. So how do we know things? And we can know things through practices, through our bodies, through sensory kind of experiences and contacts with the flow of time, the flow of materials, the flow of sensation. And so the musicians are invited into this space. And, through the course of the work, all the other sort of parts beforehand set that up because, in a way, the music offers ways of listening to each other and to sounds, and how to sort of braid these pathways of melody and pathways of harmony and counterpoint. And then at the end, there's this open space that's offered, and musicians, they are super sensitive, extraordinary, capacities. This is what musicians train for. And so this work is about this opening into this invitational space. And of course, that's also for the listeners. So, I don't really make a distinction between the musicians who listen and the audience who listens, because we're all co-creating that experience as it happens.
So I imagine it changes quite a lot from performance to performance. Is that true?
Yes, what's really amazing is we don't know not so much what the notes will sound like or the textures, because perhaps they are fairly similar, but we don't know the quality of the experience. For me, that's what's really special and available in all musical kinds of contexts. That sense of we're in the presence of something that's kind of bubbling up and emerging at that moment. And, if we're not there in that time and place, we miss that experience. So that's the special thing.
We're in the presence of the present.
Yes.
After all. So How Forests Think is part of our evening concert on Saturday, June 7th. And I'm just heard all these wonderful, natural, organic soundscapes coming from the ensemble. How do you sort of choose the instrumentation for this?
Yes, the instruments in the ensemble, they're a whole mix, from wind and brass and strings and percussion. And one of the ideas in this piece, which comes from Eduardo's thinking, is that everything has its own perspective, its own subjectivity, as if you like. And each of the instruments are kind of showing us, ways of experiencing what does the world look like from the point of view of some beans being dropped on the surface of a drum. What does the world look like from the point of view of a trumpet mouthpiece as air is passing through it and being amplified into resonances? So it's music's way of showing us a diversity of possible entry points into experience.
So getting into the real perspectives of everything around you. It sounds like that's part of what it's calling on us to do. There's an interesting Chinese instrument called a sheng. I have never come across a sheng before. What kind of instrument is that?
Yes, so the sheng is got a 3,500-year-old history in China, and the marvelous performer Wu Wei, he's a master performer in that he's really developed this instrument and its techniques. What does it look like? It's like 37 bamboo pipes. It's this forest of bamboo held within a gourd. It's an incredibly intimate instrument to play because it sounds both on the out-breath, the exhale, and the inhale. So you really get the sense of the body of the player, the breath of the player having this real unity with the instrument. And in the Chinese tradition, it's connected with ideas of a kind of pathway of flow between humans and nature. So the sheng is like this forest in miniature.
It sounds like a great instrument medium for your larger mission here. Let's hear a bit of How Forests Think. This is from a section, Pollen. That's composer Liza Lim's piece, How Forests Think 3, Pollen. Another one of the pieces that we're going to see at the festival is for solo flute, and it's titled Sex Magic, and it was commissioned for Claire Chase's Density 2036 project. This is going to be on Friday, June 6th at 3:30. Let's hear a clip of that. So beautiful. That's from a section of Sex Magic called Womb Bell. And I think I hear Big Bertha. That's Claire Chase's contrabass. We learned about that in our conversation with her on a previous episode. And I'm hearing these mechanical swells that sort of sound like distant jackhammers. What's going on here?
Okay.
Liza?
Yeah. Jackhammers. Wow. Womb Bell, that's actually one of my favorite parts of Sex Magic, because it really is the kinds of sounds that go deep inside the body. You hear the deep voice of Bertha kind of ringing out, and the mechanical sounds you talk about are actually what they are, these altars. There are two sort of surfaces, altars, which are placed in front in the installation of the piece. And on top there are various objects, so shells and little pebbles and offerings and flowers. It's very, very beautiful, beautifully lit as well. And underneath them are transducers. So people may be familiar with that. In some cinemas, they have these transducers under the chairs that vibrate. So they create these deep vibrations, these very deep frequencies that connect to Bertha's frequencies. And they shake, they vibrate these surfaces. And so it's part of this idea of the animacy of the world, that there we have... it's not just the human being, but it's the instruments. It's all the sort of objects, that surround us, the air in the space. We're all vibrating together in a kind of
dance,
in an offering, in a sort of connection, a dance and a connection with divinity.
Well, I'm eager to see the altar. And it's vibrating to Big Bertha. Sex Magic is also about, I read this quote, it's women's power as connected to the cycles of the womb, the life-making powers of childbirth. Tell us about that theme.
That was something that really evolved in the process of writing the work. I mean, it's a process that is really at the core of my work, which is to compose with whoever is in the room. So the fact that Claire invited me to write this work, and it involved Big Bertha. Bertha, the flute, has a name. There's a gendered, history and story there.
Right.
And that opened up this path to thinking about these aspects of human history and women's place. It may seem strange to say that instruments have gender, but in many traditions and cultures around the world, instruments are, reserved for particular groups of people. So some instruments in Australasia are only played by men, and they're taboo for women. And they happen to be the big flutes in those traditions in both in the north of Australia and in Papua New Guinea. And so that led me down this rabbit hole of looking at these stories of, how that, why is that expressed in culture? How do these taboos arise? And that's about controlling power.
Right.
And the power that comes from the body, the power that comes from life-giving, and so on and so forth. And so this ended up being woven into the many parts of this piece. I mean, this was performed recently in Melbourne, and it really reminded me of how it goes beyond what one might think of as a flute piece. So, it's kind of a whole opera with without words.
Yeah, this is not the sort of delicate mannered flute performance or composition that we're used to, I believe. It goes well beyond that.
There are delicate moments, very intimate, beautiful singing moments, and Claire also plays the ocarina, the beautiful ceramic um, flute, vessel flute, which is known in both Mesoamerican and, for instance, Chinese traditions. And she sings in that section. So we hear many different voices, and we hear the flute also as a drum, because the flute is electronically is linked to these drums. It also, by tapping on the flute, she also, sounds these drums. So there's this huge extension of the body.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because you can hear what sound like tribal drums at one point, and I guess she's triggering that with her flute. Is that right?
That's right. She's tapping on the keys of the flute. And this was something that was developed in a creative sort of collaboration really early on, together with Levi Lorenzo, who has been absolutely central in building the electronics and also, developing the concepts around these performance practices. So everything is actually played by Claire.
Yeah, it's the one woman band thing of, tapping and drums and all kinds of instruments coming out of one person. Let's shoot ahead to the fourth movement and hear some more. This is from a portion called Vermilion on Rage. At the end of that piece, there is what sounds like a full-on, like, terrifying human scream. And Claire plays what's called an Aztec death whistle. It's a super powerful ending. Can you tell us anything about it?
Yes, the Aztec death whistle. If you don't know what an Aztec death whistle, by the end of this piece, you definitely will. Archaeologists speculate on what it was used for, that perhaps it was used in war to terrify the enemy. And what it actually is a double-chambered whistle. So there's a sort of space within which there's a little ball that is activated by the breath, and then it's held inside another chamber that really amplifies the sound. So it's a sort of sound inside a sound, and it's an amazing acoustic magic trick, actually, and indeed an absolutely terrifying kind of moment in the piece. So yes, we're saying this piece really travels between different states of expression and being, from the very, very tiny, intimate, and tender moments to these gigantic, rage-filled and percussion-filled passages. And I suppose I wanted to, this topic, this idea of sex, what is that? Sex and eros, and that it has many dimensions. There is chaos and rage, and then there is this kind of sacred, or the sacred is found in everything. It's found in the chaos and the rage, and it's found in the beauty and the tenderness and the loving qualities. May I mention one more part in this piece?
Yeah.
Which you won't be able to play on the podcast. It's called Telepathy, and it's a 1-minute silent meditation that happens kind of in the midpoint of the piece. And after all the kind of, storming and crying out and singing and playing, there is this moment where Claire actually performs a silent meditation. And in the Vipassana meditation tradition, this is called metta, which means giving loving kindness. And it's the most wonderful thing to experience live, because again, it is about shared vibration. and it's what we can feel in our bodies, again, this idea of the presence and what, the presence of all of us in a space co-creates. So that for me is also another kind of really lovely moment in the piece.
Yeah, we're going to get highs and lows and big finishes and loving kindness and Aztec death whistles, people. So I know you haven't been to the festival before, but I'm curious, as someone who's involved in the experimental and classical musical world, what is the reputation of this festival?
I mean, it has such a storied history, so many extraordinary people have been there, and I think it's a beacon of innovation. I mean, that's lots of people do festivals in beautiful locations, but I think that sense of, questing and innovation and reinvention is really, it's really known for that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really special. We're so lucky to have it in our town. So finally, we're asking all our guests to bring along a piece of music that you've been listening to recently or that's been a real inspiration to you. What would you like us to hear?
Yes, I'd like to share a track of Jane Sheldon. She's an American-Australian soprano and composer. She's living in Australia, and work closely with her as well. Jane is recording herself and another voice performed by herself, and all of the accompaniment is made from gong sounds. The sources are sort of quite simple, but they build up this extraordinary, layered and ecstatic world, which is both lyric, meditative, and just kind of sublime. I love it.
All right, let's listen to some sublime gong sounds. So that's I Find You in All Things by Jane Sheldon. That was the pick from Liza Lim, whose spirit and whose magical, interconnected, root-pleaching music we're going to get a chance to bask in. Thank you so much, Liza, for being here.
Thank you so much, Christopher. It's been a pleasure talking.
So this concludes our 4-part series talking with composers and performers coming to the Ojai Music Festival this year. These conversations have given me a new perspective on all the wonderful concerts we're in for. And after learning so much about these pieces and the people who conceived and performed them, I feel like I've really set myself up for a much richer and deeper experience, and I do hope the same for you. The festival begins on the evening of Thursday, June 5th, and continues through Sunday, June 8th. If you haven't had a chance yet, check out the rest of the series, where I speak with composer Marcos Balter, cellist Jay Campbell, composer Anea Lockwood, this year's music director Claire Chase, and the festival's artistic and executive director Ara Guzlimian. Thank you so much for listening. See you at the festival. OJAICAST was produced by Will Thomas for the Ojai Music Festival. Visit ojaifestival.org for more information on the program, tickets, and please consider donating to the festival to keep innovative music coming to the Ojai Valley. You can find me on Instagram at Noxon Art or online at ChristopherNoxonArt.com.